if that idea of being in an interfaith community where people love and respect each other's belief systems for the shared values, that is our path forward.
Welcome to Rebuilding the Village, a podcast that seeks to explore the causes of modern problems by examining the roots of our metaphorical village through the systems and structures in society that may have been disrupted in the technological and industrial era that we inhabit. Thank you for joining me today.
All right, so how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
You've got an interesting backstory, to say the least. I was looking through your profile, and you go from a lawyer for the mob in Miami to Tao Buddhism to Christianity to meditation specialist. So, I don't even know where to start.
Well, let me ask you this one question. What is your desire to accomplish with your podcast?
It started off as a bit of a self-reflection, we'll say, on my own life and my own trajectory towards things, and realizing more and more as time and years went on that I had a lot more potential in me to accomplish things than I really thought when I was younger. And then looking back and wondering, what went wrong, quote unquote. And then as I started to really look into it and research it and started to talk to people around me in my personal space, my social life, my work life, I realized a lot of people had the exact same problems. And it's almost like it's becoming a bit of a systemic issue. And this idea of the village, essentially, that it takes a village to raise a child, is that the village can be thought of as almost like a machine that is meant to guide people from step by step throughout their lives to ideally adulthood, where you become a part of the community, part of the village, and then you help the next generation bring them up through that. And then I think you're starting to see through a lot of different statistics, like the divorce rate is collapsing, the dating scene is falling apart. There's a lot of toxicity between men and women nowadays. A variety of different things. Like men are really starting to struggle behind. Women are, it's all a bunch of different things. The population, there's a birth rate collapse going on. And you start to see there's almost, I wouldn't say dysfunctions in the machine, but a lot of different values are being pushed forward in favor of other values that are not as conducive to longevity multi-generationally. And then one of those things in particular, and I myself I kind of came around with spirituality and religion. So I wanted to talk to you today. And that when I was younger, I didn't really have much religious and maybe once every couple of years we went to church on Christmas because my cousins did or something like that. My father was raised, I think he was Catholic. My mother was Jewish, but neither of them really brought religion into the household, spirituality in the household. And even myself, I'm naturally very, we'll say, very scientific. So it's like, if I can't measure this with a piece of equipment or see it, then you're telling me there's a magic man in the sky or just judging me, or there's this universal energy that I can't pick up on a little piece of machinery that's guiding us. When I was younger, it's just this sounds like a cult. This sounds ridiculous. This sounds nonsensical. And then as I've gotten older and looking into it and really examining it from a different perspective, realizing there is such a ridiculous amount of value on a societal level, a personal level, on a group level, and a societal level around things like religion and spirituality, and that I would wager that one of the major contributions of the decline in today's day and age in the quality of social life and things like that, other problems, is due to people's retraction from religion, spirituality, and things like that.
Oh, my. We are two peas in a pod, Michael. Two. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that breaks, my upbringing and yours are very similar. My folks were non-theists. I wouldn't say they were atheists, but non-theists. Their ancestors were all wiped out, and they came to the conclusion there couldn't be a God. Although my dad did want me to go to children's Bible school to learn the Bible stories, because as Americans, we should know the Bible stories. But what hurts me the most right now, and I'm not much of I didn't grow up as a Christian at all. Although I did marry a Southern Baptist. But what hurts me is that there are so many nuns, people that do not, identify with any religion association. They just say, they say none. And those folks have turned their back on religious organizations because of the exclusivity and because of so many dogmas that just don't jive with science. And it's just hard to buy into it, as well as, the idea that everybody, 90% of the world is going to go to hell because they haven't been saved. It's just hard for people to, and so they turn their back on the church, but they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
And they don't realize that there are so many good teachings. And so they live their lives without having any kind of support to stay on track for their North Star.
Mm-hmm.
And because life becomes purposeless and meaningless. It's like, is this all there is? And living a life where this is all there is, it's never enough.
True.
So there's, I think we're going to have a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm fascinated to know how you started off as a criminal defense, I think as a defense lawyer for the mob in Miami, and then now you're here. It's
right.
Quite a journey.
Right.
So what started off with that? I'm guessing you went to law school initially?
Yeah, and there were some things, you say that some of the things that you mentioned about how the world around you tends to create forces that drive you in a particular direction. I grew up in an amusement park atmosphere, and my ambition in life was to sell enough hot dogs on the boardwalk in Queens, New York, to not have to work in the winter. That was my biggest ambition in life. And there was this guy who kept telling me I should be a lawyer. And he even went out and got a job and earned the money to buy the ticket to the Educational Testing Service law school aptitude test. And then he quit his job. And I got into a law school. So I was pushed in that direction. This fella stayed with me until 3 days after I was sworn in. And he was a heroin addict and had gone clean when I was accepted to law school. And 3 days after I was sworn in, he met some chick and they decided to shoot up, and his tolerance had gone down and he overdosed and died. But I kind of felt always that it's one of those things that led to, a spiritual awakening, that I always kind of feel John is with me as my guardian angel and pushing me forward to do the right thing. But it was meeting Master Watching Ni when I was in my 30s, by surreptitious, by synchronistic, lucky happenstances, I suppose. And that's what changed my life. We can get into that during. Yeah.
How did you get involved in being a lawyer for the mob in Miami?
Well, I actually, I went to law school down in South Florida, and we got to intern in the DA's office. Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General from the Clinton administration, she was the DA for Miami-Dade. And I worked in her office. And I was part of the Economic Crimes and Consumer Frauds Division after I rose up in the office. And so we were part of a federal task force, and together we hit the mob for like $72 million. And shortly thereafter, I left the office, hung out my shingle, and I'll call him Johnny, came to visit me. And he said, you hit us for a lot of money, and you got to be pretty good to do that. And I'd like to send you some clients. So we had a real heart-to-heart talk about what were the expectations. And it wasn't like I was consigliere or something like that. I was just someone who was trusted. And the deal was that I would not do anything. I told him I won't do anything illegal. I won't do anything unethical. And that's in your best interest as well, because you don't want a lawyer that's not respected by the courts. You want somebody whose word is gold. So that's my reputation, and I'm going to maintain that reputation, and that's in your best interest. And they completely agreed until his son was arrested on a 15-year mandatory federal cocaine trafficking charge. And then there was no saying no to him. So I went to Johnny and I said, Johnny, I'm moving to North Carolina. And he said, that's a good idea, Bob. Sometimes a man just has to move on, and this way we can part friends.
So you essentially had to move
it came
for your own protection in a way.
Well, I would be caught between a rock and a hard place, because even if I didn't do what he wanted me to do and he got another lawyer, I would be ethically bound to report that lawyer because I would know of the unethical conduct. So I just couldn't. I was caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
And that was just after years of study with Master Ni. So all things came together in a way that it was time for me to go.
There's a really good book I read years ago. It's called Mob Rules. And what it is, it's basically about 80 different, it's a guy who was in prison, I think for like 10 years. Mm-hmm. And before he went to prison, he was part of the mob, and he was illiterate. He was just like a grunt or whatever. And when he went to prison, he basically taught himself to read. And I think he became like a lawyer or something, like while he studied so much in prison, got himself out, something like that. But he wrote a book where basically he talks about how there was like 80 something different rules, and how the mob itself had a structure, a hierarchy to it, where like if you're like the different rules of like respecting each other, keeping your word, and how it applies to everyday life, even if you're not in the mafia necessarily. And like also the consequences of what can happen. And like one of the stories is like the story of like how the head of one family insulted the henchman of another family, and that henchman went on to become the head of that family within like 5-10 years. He never forgot that disrespect, and as soon as he was in charge, he had the guy killed immediately. And it was a point of just be nice to everybody, because you never know where they're going to go in life, essentially. It's true. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So sorry, what were we going to say?
Yeah. So the mob in Miami was a little bit different, because the Peruvians and the Colombians and the Cubans and the Haitians and the Italians were all talking to each other. And I will say this, that the only people that the Italians feared were the Colombians. I mean, they were nuts. They didn't follow those 80 rules. I mean, one of the rules that, among my Johnny's group was you never mess with family under any circumstances. That wasn't true for the Colombians.
I've heard the term Colombian necktie. It doesn't sound too good.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So how did you then meet up with, I forget how to pronounce his name, the master?
Master Hua Ching Ni.
Hua Ching Ni. How did you meet up? How did you connect with him?
So I was making a lot of money. I'd even paid my house off by the time I was 32 years old. And I was going out with my clients to these chrome and glass nightclubs of Miami in the Scarface. If you ever seen Scarface with Pacino, those were the days. And that was a pretty accurate portrayal of what Miami was like during those days. And my family life was falling apart. I decided I was going to go into a business, and I was arrogant and thought that I was going to make $1 billion. And I wasn't taking good care of myself, so I wasn't taking good care of anything else. I don't know how I managed to survive legally during those days, but I did. I was seeing a therapist, and one day I was going to have to refinance my house in order to keep this business idea going. And I went to see George, who was my therapist, and he reached behind himself when I asked him, what should I do, George? What should I do? This is a major crossroads in my life. Should I take a mortgage out of my house? And he reached behind and he picked up some coins and he started throwing them and making mathematical calculations and writing down lines. And then he wrote a number 72, and he reached behind him. He got this big book, opened it up to chapter 72 and showed it to me. And the title of the book, the title of the chapter was Retreat. So I cursed him out because I was paying him $65 an hour to throw coins. And I stomped out and I drove around Miami, and I couldn't get the word out of my head. So I went to the office, and I walked in, and I said to the staff, "We're done. It's over. We're closed. I'm out of money. I'm sorry." And I saved going down the rat hole to the bottom. And I was able to start, coming back up out of it, and went to see George again. I asked him what that was. Turned out it was a Taoist practice called the I Ching. And I asked him, what is Taoism? Because again, I grew up in a non-theist family. And he started to explain it to me. And turns out that he was the English language editor and disciple of Master Watching Ni, who was a 72nd generation Shaolin monk. 72nd generations. So I met Master Ni, and I learned about Taoism. And as you mentioned, not having grown up with a spiritual base that allows for any kind of supernatural creatures, Taoism presented me with an organized system of virtue that did not require me to have to believe in anything like a spiritual being. So since I wasn't probably able at that time to do that, I just glomped onto it. I mean, it was beautiful, and it was everything that I needed. Master Ni was an amazing person. George was fantastic. The Taoist group that I was in was wonderful and supportive. And it changed me so much that when I moved to North Carolina, I became a public defender. So,
yeah, I think I see a lot of people. It's interesting when you mentioned with the different mob groups and the gangs and whatnot, that I think people are quick to judge people who are in these kind of circumstances. Like, why did you join the gang? Why did you join the mob? Why the mafia? Why are you in with the wrong people? But it does kind of speak to this point about how, like, everyone is kind of looking for some form of guidance or some kind of path to things. And if you don't have healthy mentors, almost like a ladder, you're climbing the ladder. Like, if you don't reach up and grab a nice rung on the ladder of somebody ahead of you who can kind of guide you on the next step, you're going to just start reaching out blindly, and you're going to find something. And it might be the mafia, it might be gang violence, it might be the wrong crowd. And a lot of times this is where you see these people, or even mostly even young men, especially nowadays, in certain parts of downtrodden areas where gang violence is very prevalent, because there is this built-in desire for community, for a group, and also for someone to be like, what do I do next? What should I do? Why should I do it? And I've heard the stories about people, like you read in the news, like somebody robbed a bank. And the first thought I always hear people say is like, why would you rob a bank? And it's like, well, you didn't just wake up one day and say, you know what, today's a good day to rob a bank, and also maybe try to rob somebody's house and kill somebody. Like, that's a sequence of events in your life that led you to that point that you felt like you had no other options left. And this was the only logical next step. And the question to me is always like, what were the past 20 steps that got you to that point? Where was the person to stop you from making that ridiculously stupid decision? And in that case, it sounds like similar to you, is that in the case of you kind of stumbled on Taoism in a way. I think you also mentioned Buddhism and Christianity as well within your practices and your focus. So how are those all interlinking for you?
Well, those years in Miami, studying under Master Ni and George, I was focused on Taoism. When I came to North Carolina, there's not a lot of Taoists here, I promise you. And so there are Buddhists, though, and there are Buddhist temples. So that was my next step. I started to attend Buddhist services and get to know a group of Buddhists. And the difference, I suppose, is that Taoism is much more contemplative and movement oriented. Like, you've all heard of Kung Fu and Tai Chi and stuff like that. That's all Taoist ideas. And it's all about energy and yin and yang and the transfer of energy and movement back and forth. And one thing I'd like to chat with you about is the idea of going with the flow and what that means in Taoism. But so I started attending Buddhist events, and that's more meditative. So that's when I kind of got into meditation. And then, of course, later on, I wound up getting divorced and marrying a Bible literalist Southern Baptist saint. And we were so alike on our values that I wondered, how does this religion that I've always kind of had opinions about, how is it that it's produced this saint, this what in Buddhism we call a bodhisattva, somebody that is so compassionate that they would choose to stay on the earth rather than go to heaven in order to help other people get there. They just think of that concept, right? So I started looking at the teachings of Jesus more deeply. Now, I had read the Bible. To me, it was kind of an historical text and interesting. But when she showed me what the teachings did in her life, I started studying much more deeply. And then I started noticing that the teachings of the ancient Chinese philosophers like Confucius and Lao Tzu and Buddha, there wasn't a hair's breadth of difference from the teachings of Jesus. It almost seemed like Jesus was a Buddhist monk. And, there is even some evidence that Jesus traveled in India during the years that were missing and spent time in Ladakh, Tibet. And so I started taking pieces out of the seminal book of Taoism is called the Tao Te Ching. Ching means a classical book. Te means virtue, and Tao means the way. So the Tao Te Ching is the classical book of the way of virtue. And it's 81 meditations, 81 small, short, one-page chapters that lays out all of the wisdom of Taoism. I started taking paragraphs and couplets and looking for similarities in the Bible and kind of rewriting them in Christian terms. And she loved it. And we had something to talk about. It was like creating a Rosetta Stone for her. And eventually I wound up doing all 81 chapters. And then Kendall Hunt, the publisher, heard about it and reached out to me, and they published it. So I'm hearing back from a lot of people who have prior Christian upbringings, but were disenchanted with the exclusivity and organization of the organized church, who are looking at that and reestablishing their connection and relationship with the divine. So it's quite heartening for me.
Yeah, I've had people in my life who have been, I would say, like trying to encourage me, like, I hope I find Jesus. I hope I find this. And I've again, I think I kind of subscribe a little bit more to like the Taoist, Tao, Buddhist ideology and things like that. I'm speaking with somebody hopefully pretty soon who's a mortician who will be talking about how I think what you're seeing a lot more nowadays is like interfaith funeral congregations. And it's an interesting new dynamic where you have people like, in your case, maybe you were, we'll say you were raised Taoist or Buddhist and your wife is Southern Baptist. And now hypothetically, if one of you two was to pass away, unfortunately, that you'd be like maybe touching on both sides. And even actually, interestingly enough, my father was Catholic, my mother was Jewish. At their wedding, they had a priest and a rabbi. And they did a little bit of both for the ceremony, for the sake of both generations of the family. Absolutely. But
funny little story. My wife's family lives in Moultrie, Georgia. And this is like the seat of conservative Bible literalism, Southern Baptism. And when she started dating me, they all were questioning whether she was about to yoke herself to a heathen. So we were to be married by her Southern Baptist preacher. And we got married in our new house that we bought together. And I was up there in front with her whole family was behind us. And he looks at me and he goes, do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Master? And we're holding hands. And I'm pausing there just a moment. And I start to feel her nails dig into my palm. And there is this collective silence in the audience behind me. And I go, yes. This is great relief.
Yeah. I've heard about this in regards to, I don't know if it's Southern Baptist, but there's a lot of disenchantment, like you mentioned before, with people in religion nowadays. And from what I understand, I had to look more deeply into it, that there was, at some point in the past, we'll say 50, 60 years, there was a heavy amount of like fire and brimstone in a lot of the religions, and there still are in certain places, but it started to become not as popular in place of something referred to as prosperity gospel. You've heard of this before?
Yeah, that's like Joel Osteen.
Yes, and the problem, we'll say, behind it is that it may be letting too many things go by the wayside as far as common values to follow, in favor of more volume of people and people giving donations.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
And that in effect is kind of becoming problematic, because you're starting to see people who are claiming a certain degree of religious value while not actually holding up those actual values, because it's like, well, I go to, Joel Osteen church, or I go to this church, but it's like, but they're okay with me, drinking on the weekend and partying and sleeping with 100 different people. And but as long as I go to the church, I'm just, it's like a little reset button once a week. I don't actually have to, I don't have to do the things outside of the church, as long once I get to church, once I do the things, and how that could be part of the interweaving of the, I guess, like slow societal issues we're having now. And it's almost like, in a nutshell, it's like I kind of came to this conclusion with religion and certain spirituality, is that like the purpose of it, among other things, is to kind of help you in a collective manner to contain your lesser, we'll say, impulses. Like, because it's never going to be a day where, even if I'm single right now, if I'm happily married or something like that, once in a while I'm going to see a really attractive woman and some thoughts are going to cross my mind and I can't help it. And I'm not, but if I don't act on it, that's where the benefit is. It's like,
right.
Just because you had the thought doesn't mean you're cheating. But if you acted on the thoughts and you entertain the thoughts, then you're starting to step into some dark territory. But I think people are trying to like push that boundary inch by inch of like, well, it's not cheating if I just talk to her. Well, it's not cheating if we just go out for drinks once in a while. It's not cheating if, like she happens to put a hand on me. Well, it's not cheating if I'm just like, it just starts, you start justifying to yourself all these tiny little transgressions. And then all of a sudden one day an affair happens and you wonder where this happened. Like, well, it happened 30, it's not cheating steps ago. And it's all that applies to other areas of people's lives.
Yeah. And I wonder whether you're being too generous. Because there are things have progressed in my mind. If you take a look at the combination of politics and religion, and the idea of the rising idea of Christian nationalism, and connecting, my belief that the politic of my village should be my particular values. It leads to a sensation that what I think and what I believe and what I want and what I should have and what I need to satisfy my desires are actually the most important thing.
Yeah, egocentrism.
Yeah. And when that occurs, if I see this woman and I decide I want to have an affair, then I'm entitled to it. And then there's the whole entitlement thing and the like. And that's why it's so important to be in a community that has its values constantly repeated. The Buddha said that in life, it is important to take refuge from time to time. We need to, take exactly what that means. Take refuge, back away from being involved in the day-to-day stuff. And he said, there are 3 jewels that you must develop if you want to maintain your personally decided upon goals. And they are, you need a teaching, a teacher, and a community that supports you. So, in Taoism, the teaching would be the Tao Te Ching, the teacher would be Lao Tzu, and the Sangha, or the community, would be, or if in Christianity, it could be the Bible and Jesus, or your preacher and the church. Now, if they have become corrupted, that's of course a problem. And one has to be on guard for that. But if you find, like my wife and I have found a very, very progressive Christian church that accepts me as identifying as a Taoist Buddhist Christian, and they're very happy with that. And they accept her as a Bible literalist. Mm-hmm. And there's one Sunday adult school, one adult class that she goes to, and I go to the Seekers, and she goes to the historical class. And it's broad enough to accept both of us, and we're very, very comfortable there. And it is the first time that I've ever been involved in a mainstream religious organization. And what I enjoy the most about it is there are always people there that are willing to lend a hand for a good cause. So like when COVID hit, I do a lot of cooking. My wife also has a culinary degree. And so we said, well, Meals on Wheels can't keep up with the demand. So let's find some drivers and let's start cooking. And so all of a sudden we had 20 volunteers that came out every week, and we went shopping, and we cooked 300 meals 3 times a week. And other people came and delivered them out to folks. And we did that for 14 months.
Wow.
You can't just find that, in your neighborhood very easily.
Yeah. There's a book I just finished reading. I would highly recommend to anybody. It's called The Anxious Generation.
Mm-hmm.
And in a nutshell, it's from Jonathan Haidt, talks about the impact of social media and modern day video games and things like that on developing young minds. And among other things, all the problems that we're having with today's generation. But one of the points he makes in particular is the fact that community has gone online. And mm-hmm. your brain, you can kind of sort of trick part of your brain into satisfying that urge for community, but it's not mm-hmm. it's like having Skittles for dessert at a 5-star restaurant. There's something better, but you can't exactly articulate what it is. And it's interesting how I think I've heard that people nowadays, it ties into both things you said earlier, that if the church becomes corrupt, it's difficult because I think what we're having nowadays more than anything is this sense that like our neighbors are dangerous. Mm-hmm. Our next door, our friends are like if I'm a conservative, my friend is a Democrat, like that, then I can't talk to them. I can't talk to mm-hmm. them. Oh my God, they're evil. They have different values. And a big part I don't even do things like Facebook much at all anymore, outside of maybe business purposes, that like people I grow up with, and I see them attacking each other because there's a study I remember reading about years ago. It was talking about how they had like brain scanners on people, and they would say to somebody like, we want you to type something out, like a mean message to the person in the other room. You'd be like, I hate you. I think you're ugly. You're stupid. And they would check the brain scan, how like it lit up certain parts of your brain. And they say, now we want you to do the exact same thing, but we're going to say it verbally to the person in the room. Mm-hmm. And like the pathways that lit up were completely different. And even the person was like, I feel disgusting saying this because this person's right here in front of me.
Right.
What things like social media and technology are doing nowadays essentially is cutting off that interpersonal communication.
Right.
That it's one thing if you might say, oh, I donated money to a charity that's going to feed people, versus you actually spending the time to group up the volunteers to try to figure out how to feed people. And even if it's not going to solve the entirety of the hunger problem, it's still making a dent somewhere.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Because I teach at the university here, at Elon University. I teach a business law class. I also teach a meditation class, and they're wildly different. But the business law class, I get a lot of emails from my students, and if they're not happy with something, they will send me an email that has a terrible tone to it. It's just an offensive, I don't understand why you did this, blah, blah, blah. And I don't understand. It does, I think that and like that. And I will send them back an email that says HMMM ... In other words, I'm not sure that I understand the tone of your email. Were you being offensive, or was that just something else? And they will quickly send back, oh, I didn't mean to be offensive. Or I'll call them and tell them that. And when you talk to them, it's completely different. So there is this, I think, of course, part of our training and socialization is that we do something and we see the response when we're with somebody in person. And if we're not seeing that response, we're not getting the feedback that we need to be able to monitor and adjust our own output.
Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah, I had another professor I interviewed a couple of weeks ago who said the exact same thing, and her message was talking about the importance of compassion, and that a lot of she was a professor at university, and she'd give students, B or C, whatever they got, and they're like, "Why did you give me this grade?" And you're like, "Well," she'd be like, "All right, well, if you want to come in and talk to me, we can sit down and we can discuss it in person." And 99.9% of the time, they'd be like, "I thought about it. You're right. I actually deserve that grade. I'm sorry. You're right." They would just kind of like concede because they didn't realize, and this is a big problem I see nowadays, is that people don't realize how many, I guess, parts of your biology, your emotions can be so affected by your environment, by your internal environment. But the problem, I think, even which things that thing like Taoism, and Buddhism, and things like do a good job of explaining is like, there are things in part of you that have influences on you in ways that you're not going to be aware of, and you have to be constantly on guard to recognize when something is affecting you in ways that's not inherently obvious. And one of the benefits of community and having people around you holding you accountable is they can see in things in you that you can't see in yourself because your own ego is in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the beauties of meditation. Let me chat with you for a second, if I may, about this practice of the I Ching in Taoism, because it's exactly that. Have you ever noticed that there are certain times when you might have a brilliant idea and nobody wants to listen to you?
Every day.
Right? Every day. And there are other times when it seems like everything you touch turns to gold. Right? Or using another metaphor, if you're out in the ocean and you want to swim into shore, the waves or the tide is going to be against you and it's going to be with you. And so if you adjust and align yourself with your environment, you'll swim like heck when the tide is with you. And when it's against you, you don't waste energy. You just try to hold your place using as little energy as possible so you can build your energy up. So when the tide turns and goes with you, you can again swim like heck. So this is, in essence, the teaching of Taoism. But it's a bit more complicated. The idea is to become sensitive to the energy that's in your environment and the energy that's in the interpersonal relationships and in your relationship with the environment at any particular time, so that you can align yourself with it so that you can go with the flow. But it's not like floating down a river. It's more like floating down a river and navigating it with care.
I like that.
So you don't run aground and you don't come up on the rocks and you steer away from the stuff. But the energy that's required is much more effective and efficient than trying to paddle upstream.
Yeah.
And so what Taoism does is it breaks these times, these energy categories, down into 64 slices of the pie. And each slice has 6 sub-slices.
Wow.
So there might be a time that's called preponderance of the great, when everything is going for you. There may be a time of retreat, like I mentioned before. There may be a time of progress. There may be a time of calculated waiting. There may be all these different times. And as you do the practice of the I Ching, you actually spend time each day in a 10-minute practice contemplating and beginning to learn to recognize the energies that you are in, and then helping to understand how to best align yourself. So, for example, if nobody's listening to you, the best thing you can do is be quiet. But use the time to prepare what it is that you want to say, make it more concise, make it more to the point, make it more communicable, so that when the situation shifts and the energy shifts and people are listening to you, you're the best prepared that you can be.
This ties in really nicely with, I got into a program this past year and a half, about a year and a half ago, and I'm still struggling with it. It's like a stock trading program, but it's more like portfolio construction, how to pick companies. And it was a really, really, really good program for how to build a portfolio from top to bottom, how to manage it on like a 1 to 3 month time horizon, how to basically do it really well. As far as picking companies, picking sectors, looking for trends, following the news, the one thing that I was amazing at picking companies like at the right time. I was fantastic at like reading the information, reading to the companies, seeing through like what's going to be good, what's not going to be good, but then actually like executing on those trades. My emotions always got the best of me. I'd be like, this is like all the stars are aligned. This is a perfect trade. This is a great idea. And then all of a sudden I'd be like, but what if I'm wrong? I don't know. I don't know if I could trust myself right now. And like the biggest thing, even to this day, I'm still working on is like the biggest hang up is my own emotions. It's my own internal environment and how much that it can just really start to like affect your thinking in ways. Cause like I said, I had fantastic ideas. I would have hypothetically made a lot of money. And multiple times it was just like, but what if I don't think, and then I would pull back and then like, it was like the river just started flowing as soon as I got out of the water. Like that would have been the perfect time to put my boat down and just start sailing. And I missed it like over and over and over again because I kept doubting myself and having these fears around it, and how I forget what we were talking a second prior to that, but it ties into that sense of just like waiting for the right moment, being patient. And when you see it, don't be afraid to just step into the river and see how far it'll take you.
Yeah. And, a lot of people think that is a talent that some people are born with, that have, they've come to it, through genetics, but it is something that absolutely can be learned. But it needs to be practiced. Whenever I'm talking about meditation, invariably somebody will say, oh, that's what I need. I need meditation. That's what I need. And what's that about? And then I say, well, would you be willing to put aside 15 minutes a day? Oh, I don't have 15 minutes a day. Well, you could get up 15 minutes early. Oh, no, I'm not going to get up 15 minutes early. So
you could turn off Netflix. No, I can't do that. No, I have to watch my shows. Come on.
So it is a practice. But maybe we could get, one of the things I love to chat about for a moment is, what meditation is and what it's not, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of people think that meditation is about learning to breathe. It's about quieting the mind. It's about emptying the mind. It's about getting some kind of personal space, tranquil, finding peace and the like. And although those things come in time, it's not like the focus. Yeah, I kind of think of the metaphor of football. I mean, eventually you want to make a touchdown, but right now you just want to execute this play properly. And that, the focus is on the play. So in what we do in meditation is the instructions are really quite simple. You sit, you form an intention to put your attention on your breath, and then immediately, or within a few seconds, your mind starts to wander and it goes nuts. And it starts thinking about the guy that was yesterday. And everybody thinks immediately when that happens that they're doing it wrong. But they're not. Yeah. This is doing it right. But the difference between your mind just being in default mode and thinking about, being lost in a fog of reminiscing and projecting in default mode, in meditation, we're actually taking note and noticing what we normally just do automatically. That process of noticing your stream of thinking causes you to develop a connection with another part of you that can actually watch yourself.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
Metacognition is another word for that.
Metacognition. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Metacognition. Yeah. So we practice, it's the idea of practicing metacognition. And as you practice that, you start to familiarize yourself with the sensation of being awake, so that, because that metacognition, when you're noticing, you're awake. You see, you are not asleep in the fog. And so one of the things that we always say is, I'm not my thoughts. We identify with our thoughts. Something happens. Cognitive behavioral therapy tells us something happens, and then we have a thought, and that thought produces a sensation, and that sensation causes an action. And if we can catch the thought that caused the sensation, we have some access to it. So meditation is the practice of learning to catch the thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that a lot.
We're not skilled at that.
We're not born with it.
That's a
big thing people have a problem with. I think they think it's like, oh, I have no patience. It's like when people say, I can't do yoga, I'm not flexible.
Right.
Like, that's the whole point of going to yoga. Like, because you're trying to become flexible. But I've noticed it myself nowadays. I've gotten much, much better at it, where it took a long time and a lot of things. And it's almost like when it comes to your body and your mind and everything like that, it sucks, because in a way, you're not born with an instruction manual. And you don't know. You have some ideas of where you might be strong and weak in, but you also have to, maybe you can get that from looking at your parents and their genetics and their temperament and your environment. But even then, it's tough to really identify and square off like what you're good at, what you're not good at, where to keep your guard up, where not. Like, for me personally, I know I have a very overactive mind. I love to just like work and do things. And if I stop doing things, I fall into like almost like semi-depressed and anxious states very quickly. But nowadays, I've gotten to a point where I basically say to myself, like, oh, I feel like crap. Wait, hold on. Did I go for a walk today? Did I get some sunshine? Have I talked to anybody? Did I eat a clean meal? Have I exercised? Like, if no, then of course, that makes sense why I'm feeling depressed. I need to just do those things. And then afterwards, I'll feel better. Even though in that moment, it can be so difficult to tell yourself that because the way you're thinking in the moment, and maybe this is a principle of Taoism, Buddhism, things like that. The way you're thinking in the moment is not necessarily what you're going to be thinking in the future. And it's a very tough thing for people to grasp, is like, if I do something fun, but I feel like crap, I'm not going to feel like crap while doing something fun 10 minutes from now. I'm going to enjoy myself, but it's going to be a different person when that time comes. It's not the same person I am right now. I have to almost like voluntarily let go of who I am in the moment to become who I'm going to be in the next moment to try to improve the situation.
Absolutely. And here's the beauty, because I can tell you this because I experience it personally, and not only me, but I've been to many meditation retreats, and this is just the common thinking. The beauty of it, what you say is 100% right on, 100% right on. And the beauty of it is this, that as you meditate and you go into that metacognitive state, and you're watching your thinking, it gives you the ability to go ahead and be angry, or to be sad, or to grieve. But at the same time, you can watch your grieving. You can be angry and watch your anger. It's like, if in that situation, it's like there's a storm on the surface of the ocean, but you're also 20 foot down, and it's all calm down there, and you're watching the storm from a calm place, but you still are in the storm.
Yeah.
And so when you are in that place and you get attached to a thought that's in the present that is not helpful, at the same time, you can be watching and assessing, well, that's not really helpful. Maybe I could just let that go. So everything that you say is the difficulty that we have is what meditation is designed to give you the skill to be able to do.
Yeah, it comes a little bit almost spooky in a way too, to me, because what it basically says is like your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. If you learn to start getting a better sense of metacognition, you start to become aware of yourself. But then the question becomes like, well, who's generating these emotions? Clearly, it's not. Is it not me? I thought it was me. I thought I was in charge. And this is a common thing I've had some discussions with some friends about. Is this idea of one of the problems with today, especially with social media and other things, is people will say, and I love this quote, it's like people will say, like, what do you want in life? And the better question to ask is, what do you want to want? Like, and within that question, you basically say, I have to like figure out what I want to want, because there's going to be forces and impulses both internally and externally in my environment, both internally and externally, that are going to push me away from that desire. And I have to try to cultivate an environment and surrounding and a community to keep me on that path, because there's something else inside me or even around me that's pushing me in certain directions. So when people say, especially this is something that ties into the current state of affairs with like the marriage and the dating scene, and there's a large number of women nowadays who are basically single and childless and regretting it because they were told for a long time, like, what you're going to want is your career and nothing else. Mm-hmm. And then they hit their mid 30s to 40s and they go like, what the hell? Why did nobody tell me that when this time comes, I would just suddenly want a family? Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't preparing for it. Or why did nobody tell me, like, like the wasting all this time doing whatever I'm like, could be video games, whatever it is, like I would want to do more with my life by the time, like, why did nobody tell me a midlife crisis was coming, whatever it might be? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this question then becomes of like, well, who's influencing your thoughts? Who's in control of your mind? And who really has it? Is it you, or is it the people around you, or is it social media? And even with like the things like the algorithm, it's funny how like that word has become like a thing. It's no longer an algorithm, it's the algorithm. And how it's getting to a point where it's so good at predicting not only what you're interested in, but what you might be interested in the future, so that it can push you in that direction to the point that you say, like, did I even make this decision in the first place? Or was it made for me like 2 months ago or 2 years ago from the algorithm trying to push me down this road in the first place? And then I get to this point and I'm miserable and I'm wondering what the hell happened to my life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I hear you. You know, like what you said before, who is it that's having the thought? I mean, look at what we say in language. We actually say, I had a thought. That's what we say. I had a thought. Well, who is the I that's having the thought? So, you know, if you're spiritual, you might even say, well, maybe that's your soul. If you're psychological, you could say maybe it is the id. If you're more neuropsychological or neurological, you might say, well, that's the database, and it's all the cultural conditioning and all the stuff that I've been fed. I kind of go with the database idea that that we take in information and it gets stored in our database. But what happens in meditation is that as we spend a certain amount of time every single day going into that metacognition and watching our thoughts, we start to notice patterns. We start to notice these recurring thoughts. And because we're doing metacognition regularly every day as a practice, you can't do it just once in a while. You have to see the patterns. And then you can ask yourself, oh, I keep getting this thought that tells me that I'm a piece of, you know what? And then you might ask yourself, from that metacognitive state, you might ask yourself, is that really true? Is that really helpful? So you can't absolve yourself of the thought, because whatever you resist persists. You can't say, I don't want to think about that. I want to throw that away. But what you can do is you can allow it to come up, and you can allow it to come up until, in effect, it becomes boring. You've seen it so many times now. It just becomes boring. And when it becomes boring, it has no effect on you anymore. It doesn't have the power. It's funny that once you have seen it enough time and you're bored, it's like, oh, I'm having that thought again. And when that happens, it loses all power over you. You realize it's just, you know, a nothing. And it's almost like your thoughts are bratty little kids And if you pay them enough attention and you let them have their thing, like they go, oh, this is no fun anymore. I'm just going to leave this guy alone. Mm-hmm. And they go away. And then you start to be able to assemble the you that you want to be. And it's like you develop the ability to have a say in the matter of your life, because up until you can start to work with your thoughts, I think that you're living the life the world gave you.
The question, I think people, have you heard this term postmodernism?
I have heard that, and I'm a little not understanding of it.
It's basically, from what I can gather, in a nutshell, and this is going to be a butchering of it, I'm sure someone on a comment will yell at me or make me getting it wrong, is that essentially it's like this idea that everything in society and life and the world, mostly in society and our day-to-day lives, is a construct that society itself created, that somebody else is deciding for you what your thoughts and feelings and ideas should be, and that you essentially have the power for like almost infinite malleability of your life to a point. And it's like you could be whoever you want to be. You can be, and then you starts to breaking it down even to like not to really poke the bear too much, but things like gender ideology, where it's like you could be whatever gender you want to be, you could be whatever person you want to be, identity you want to be. And it's like, so maybe it starts off big, like you could be whatever you want to be in life, as far as, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, where do you want to live, who do you want to live with? And then, but it keeps going further and further and further and further, and it keeps drilling down until like your life is a complete blank space, etch-a-sketch, whatever it is, and you can draw in whatever picture you want from the bottom upwards, and there's any influences on you, like wanting to have a family, wanting kids, wanting to be a part of your community, is actually just society's pushing on you the idea and not you having the idea yourself. Mm-hmm. And the problem, I think, what you're seeing nowadays with that kind of thinking is that it answers an interesting question of like, if you have a lot of thoughts that are not your own because they were put there by something else, by your community, by your surroundings, then how much of you is actually you? Versus how much of you is society and the world around you. But even then, again, it starts to drill down to this point of like, if you're a person, man or woman or whatever, that wants to have a family, is that society telling you that, or is that your own biology telling you that? Mm-hmm. And even then, can you really get to a point where you can start to like get rid of that too? And like, so again, like, and this, so you get down to this metaphorical question of like, how much of me is me and what do I actually want to do in life? And am I deriving pleasure or joy from things because I actually enjoy it, or because people around me are telling me to enjoy it?
Yeah. No, good question. There's also another complicator in that. And I kind of call it the double reverse whammy of life. And it
sounds like a game show.
It is it is. Well, here's, and this is kind of a combination of my own thinking and Jungian ideas. But when we are young, things happen to us, and some of those things make us feel good about ourselves, and some of those things make us feel like we are a bad person. When our parents yell at us to protect us, like get out of the road, we interpret that as children as we're bad. It's not that I'm doing a bad thing, but that I am bad.
Yeah.
And it's like writing on a brand new chalkboard. Those sensations are deeply held. And so we wind up with the strange mixture of I'm good at some things and I'm bad at other things. Unfortunately, though, so many of the folks that are out there today have a greater bad side than they do good side. They have a committee going off in their head telling you're not good enough, you're not thin enough, you're not this enough, you're not smart enough, you didn't say the right thing, you should have said this. And this is constant dribble of self-loathing that goes on. So we actually have a sensation that the true self, the real who we are, is this bad thing. The good stuff doesn't get in our way. The bad stuff does. But I can't very well go up and say to you, Michael, hi, my name's Bob, I'm a jerk. I can't introduce myself that way. So I will create a facade, a mask that is my social face towards everyone else. And we think that it's a fraud. But the funny part is that it is the person that we actually constructed out of our own thinking and abilities and wisdom. And so it really is who we are, but we conceptualize it as the fraud. And the mistaken identity that we adopted as a child that truly is not true, we accept as real. And so as a result, what we see happening, and, you know, I do a lot of work with parents right now. I do a lot of work with parents whose kids have been taken away by the Department of Social Services and the like, and with family abuse services and other, you know, kinds of domestic violence situations. And what you see in a very toxic relationship is that the two people are there and they have their masks out, and from their masks, they are affectionate with each other. But as they get closer and closer and more intimate with each other, they get afraid that their true selves are going to be discovered. So they push themselves away. And so almost in all relationships, you see this kind of oscillating closer, farther away. In healthy relationships, it's like this. In toxic relationships, it's really, really bad.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we do self-sabotaging because we are holding up a shield to protect ourselves from revealing the self that we believe to be true, which isn't really true at all. And so that's why I call it the double reverse whammy of life, because it causes us to do things that are counterproductive because we're actually protecting something that doesn't need protecting.
I think there's a joke from Chris Rock, and he was talking about this, where it's like, when you meet somebody on a date, you're not meeting that person, you're meeting like their agent.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it ties in nicely to actually what I'm trying to do with this podcast as well, is I'm interested down the road, because I forget what we mentioned earlier, that there was a profession that you got into that everyone was telling you you should be a lawyer. That's what it was.
Right,
you mentioned everyone thing. I've had people tell me I should be a therapist, and I really enjoy long form conversation, and I do massage therapy for a living. So I've gotten very good at reading people's body language and a long form conversation for an hour. They tell me everything. They tell me their life story, their family, their marriage, their sex life, everything, kids. And a lot of times, like you mentioned before, is they don't realize they're coming in with a facade on. That sometimes, like, the cause of the problems is the fact that you're not being authentic about what you want. And you're afraid the person you're with is not going to approve of it. And then sometimes in that capacity, though, it can actually be a good thing for everybody if you just let it go and see what happens. And there's actually, so what I'm interested in doing with this podcast too, as well, is incorporate some down the road, some degree of like almost like a mentoring, life coaching type model thing. Because especially for men in particular, I think nowadays we don't have enough male models of masculinity for men and whatnot, but also like what's you mentioned with the couple there before, who are pretending to be who they are. There's a really good book I just read recently. It's called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And the idea is that nice guy is like a syndrome. And the syndrome basically is you created this facade of the person you thought you're doing everything for everybody else, but you're never asking for what you want.
Right.
And you're convinced if I'm just a nice guy and if I make everybody happy, then eventually I'll just be happy naturally. But it ends up repelling people, because after a while, people can kind of tell, like, you're just BSing me. I could tell this is not what you like, based on your body language, your tone of voice, your happiness, that like you're not actually being authentic to yourself. And it gives off this kind of energy to people. They don't realize, like, why can't they make friends? Why can't they get what they want? Why do, like, especially guys, like, why do women keep rejecting me? Or even if you're gay, like, having a hard time finding long-term relationships, like, because your true self is under there somewhere, but you keep burying it down because you're so afraid people are not going to like you for who you are.
Yeah. I hear you. There's there is a Dr. Harville Hendrix, Hendrix, who wrote a book called Getting the Love That You Want, in which he explores a particular kind of therapy called imago therapy, in which he puts forward the idea that sometimes we choose a partner who will wound us in the same way that our childhood wounds were made, because our desire is to change that person into a loving person, in the same way that I wish I could have changed my environment to be a loving environment when I was a child. And if I can solve that in my adult life, I will solve my childhood wounds. And so the person that we pick that's the worst person for us, actually, if we all become aware and awake of the dynamics that are working, can be the best person for us. And it is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful methodology. In fact, when I married my current wife, I had one prior marriage. She had 2 prior marriages. And we were determined that we were not going to go down that road again. So even as soon as we got married, as soon as we started courting, I showed her the book and she said, "This is interesting stuff." So we found ourselves an imago therapist. We didn't have any problems, but we just went through the process. And now we're 22 years married and happy as can be.
Beautiful. This is with your current wife.
This is my current wife. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a tough point, because one of the biggest hangups to that kind of transformational process is you have to want to do it. And a big part of the problem I think people have, the biggest thing I notice is it's spooky when you, like we talked about metacognition earlier, it's spooky when you realize how much your mind can trick you into thinking you think what you're thinking is like the thing you're thinking, when reality somebody else is trying to pull the strings for an old behavior pattern that you're trying to reinforce without even realizing it. And that I've read a lot about like relationship dynamics, in particular things like attachment theory. Talks about like anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. And one of the hardest things to work through with those type of, because even myself, I'm almost like I'm like a recovering nice guy. I was quite a people pleaser when I was a kid, when I was younger. Family dynamics kind of fed into that. But I was like basically just trying to please everybody, and then was miserable myself, and I couldn't figure out why. But the hardest part of it is also recognizing that when you make the choice to say, like, I want to break this pattern of behavior, your mind is going to like come at you tooth and claw and nail and spear and fang and guns blazing to do everything it can to convince you to not do it, because it's completely contrary to the persona you've created. And that the feeling you have of changing that behavior is the detox itself. It's like when you have if you're very avoidant, if you're very, very anxious, and I'll get like previous relationships, whenever my girlfriend would back away, my anxiety would spike. When in reality, the best thing I could do is just calm myself down and sit and wait and see what happens. But my anxiety would spike, and I would go into full force trying to like fix things out and cure things and resolve it. And then the flip side of that is when you're an avoidant, that your nervousness spikes dramatically, and you start telling yourself, like, this fear is justified because there's something threatening me in the environment around me. It must be the person I'm with. It must be because this relationship wasn't meant to work out. It must be because something else. And in reality, like, that fear is what you have to sit in until it passes, to then try to layer a new way of thinking on top of that, and then just practice reinforcing it, which is why it's so, and it's interesting in the case of those types of things, like you did with your current wife, is that the only way to really fix these behaviors is while in a relationship. You have to be physically practicing the behaviors to then adjust and course correct the behaviors to then create new behaviors.
Yes.
And it's amazing how much like your brain and mind will do everything it can to just convince you like you're about to be eaten by a bear. You're about to be murdered. Terrible things are going to happen. Your anxiety spikes to 1,000%. Your fear goes off the roof. You're terrified, but you're justifying the feelings through again, like there's a really good book. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, same guy from the Anxious Generation book earlier. And he talks about how neurologically the way our brain works is that you have an intuition or an emotional response to something, and then your logic layers on a story onto that to justify it. And people really mix this up, thinking, this is what I'm thinking. This makes sense to me. When in reality, it's like, no, you think you're thinking things, but there's an internal sensor going on. Your body doesn't tell you You're feeling anxious because you forgot to turn the stove off.
Right.
You're feeling anxious because you didn't do this and that today. Your body just goes, here's some anxiety. Figure it out.
Yep.
Have fun.
Yep.
You have no idea. And you start trying to create the environment around you. And it's a tough thing to convince people that, like, but also the importance of the community and accountability through other people and emotional co-regulation. The idea of you need to have people around you that you can trust to call out your BS when it happens, because you're not going to see it. And it's a very common thing where it's like, I make my own decisions for me. And it's like, if somebody loves you and they're telling you something you don't want to hear, you probably need to hear it. And it's a really difficult thing for people to grasp. Like, this is what I feel. This is what I thought. This is what I want. And it's like, it's probably not. It's probably something else. And it takes a lot to uncover that, detox from that, and then spooky to say, like, what the hell was like. I had a period of, and anybody who knows me really well can talk about this. You know what the term limerence is?
No.
It's a fancy term in psychology for, like, uncharacteristically high infatuation with somebody that does not reciprocate. So you create a fantasy in your head of, like, oh my God, this person's amazing. We talked once or twice, but we're probably going to get married, or we're going to have, you know, like, the whole family. It's going to be amazing. And the other person's like, you're nice, but I'm not really into you. And you're like, maybe they are into me, but they're not really admitting it yet. Maybe they show me this sign here and there. And you just get down this this rabbit hole where your mind is just spending all this time and energy chasing after this imaginary fantasy that's not actually going to happen. But during it, and this happened to me a while back for about almost like close to like 8-9 months with a girl I was chasing, that it made perfect sense in the moment. And I had people around me who were just like, oh, it sounds like it makes perfect sense. And I had a few close friends who were just like, you need to drop this. This is really dangerous. Like, it's not like your mind is really going off the deep end. At the time, looking back in the moment made perfect sense. Looking back, complete insanity. I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
Yeah.
But how that can be so scary to think, like, I don't even know if I could trust myself. And then learning how to trust yourself, and then trust yourself to pick people to create your village or your community, people around you that you know you can trust to call you out when you're going, or when you're veering off the deep end like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, part of that also comes from, you know, evolutionary psychology, where, you know, when we have been in this body with this brain, you know, for how many millions of years, going back to the time that we were hunter-gatherers, 77 million generations, if I remember correctly, that we've been in this body with this mind. And there hasn't, we still have it. And, you know, back in the days when we were in the jungle, if there was something that was threatening us, it was clear what it was. If it was a snake or a tiger, we understood it immediately. And there was, we were in danger. And so all of our protective systems, our parasympathetic systems, sympathetic systems were all, you know, evolved in order to protect us from dangers. We see a snake, our adrenaline jumps in, we're going to fly, we're going to fight, we're going to do something, and we're going to work off all that energy and glucose that's dumped into our system. So now move all these millions, these thousands of years later, and we're living in a world where our stressors are invisible. They're no longer snakes and tigers, they're deadlines. They're bus schedules. They're honey-do lists that I haven't done. And so, like, I think what you said was so right on, because all of a sudden our stress levels increase, and we sense it and we know it that we're stressed, but we need something to attach it to, because it doesn't make sense for us to be stressed when we look out with our eyes and we don't see a stressor. Yeah. And so we're just not physically constructed for the environment that we're living in. And that's why it's so important to actively take on some activity that's going to balance it out. You know, if you jog, you know, you look at joggers for the most part, people that go out and jog every day, they tend to have a little bit more balance in their life because they're doing that thing which is giving them a little dopamine fix, a little dopamine serotonin fix, and it's balancing out the electrical activity in their left and right prefrontal cortexes. And if we don't intentionally do some action regularly to balance out the stressors or the negative aspects of the brain, which all kind of center in the right prefrontal cortex. If we don't balance that out, we're going to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to a lot of folks. They can take an MRI of my brain right now, and by looking at the relative electrical activity that's in the right and left prefrontal cortex, they can uncannily predict whether I'm a pessimist or a negatively oriented person or a positively oriented person. So if it's playing games or doing Wordle or having the crossword puzzles or playing with your grandkids or whatever it is, if you do it regularly and you build up those neural pathways in your left brain, that's how you balance life out. You've got to do something intentionally in order to have that balance. Otherwise, the world that we're living in is a disaster.
It's interesting what you mentioned before with you need to find a thing to put the stressor on. And I think I noticed this for myself, and I'm interested maybe if you have much sense of in Buddhism and Taoism and things like that, they have a certain line of thinking in terms of culinary and food and things you should stay away from and things you should eat. And I noticed myself when I was younger, I had a lot of digestive issues. I had a lot, but realistically looking back, what it was just eating junk food all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time in history we have such a ridiculous amount of ease of access to just processed toxic junk food. But part of my childhood, I was absolutely terrified of the dark. Terrified. Whatever spooky horror movie I just watched, that was what was in my closet that night, basically every night. And I noticed as I got older is that even into my mid-20s, I was still afraid to go to sleep with the light off or having sunlight somewhere, like a night light. And it only really changed when I changed my diet. But what happened when I was younger was I would be whatever under the beds in the closet. I have a hard time. I had to sleep with the TV. I have white noise. I have to sleep with the TV on. I can't sleep with the TV off. It just terrifies me. And then as I got older, what happened was I'd be my apartment. If I really had some junk food, I would notice that I'd be lying in bed and I'd be I feel like I'm not alone. I don't know how to describe the feeling, but I have a feeling someone's in the apartment with me. So well, all right, did you lock the door? Yes. Are you sure you locked the door? Yes. Okay. Did you close the window? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Did you lock everything? Yes. Okay. So there's no way somebody could be in here with me right now. Okay. Well, what if something is in here right now? And then I'm just I can't win. I can't win. No matter what I keep thinking, it's because the idea keeps morphing and changing. It has to be something going on in your environment to justify why you're feeling anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it took a lot of time and practice to recognize if I eat something that does not agree with me, I'm going to have trouble sleeping. But I have to keep telling myself it's internal, it's internal, it's internal, it's not external. But I think a lot of times nowadays you get people who, with the dietary issues, that they start to attribute problems in their life or in the world to external sources. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult from an egotistical perspective even to acknowledge that you have more impact. This is the term is internal locus of control. You have more agency and more impact over your life and day to day than you realize, but you have to also realize how your decisions now will affect you later on in ways that you maybe don't fully understand. This is why things like journaling and having people around you call you on these behaviors is so important. And even being in the case of a long-term marriage or relationship where your wife probably knows you really, really well, so that when you start acting slightly off, she picks up on it right away. Because she can pick up on it faster than you can, because maybe you're not as cognizant of your behaviors and your patterns and whatnot. But how it's amazing how for me in particular, it was diet. And also sometimes the matter of just making sure I go out and socialize if I need to go talk to people and see people, but recognizing when I'm feeling depressed or anxious or nervous or angry or any kind of emotion we talked about earlier, it's more often than not, something is dysregulated, something either in me or very, very, very close to me, or something I haven't done yet that needs to be done.
About the Buddhist view of food and nutrition. Well, mostly it's, I mean, from in Buddhism, it's mostly, vegetarian is the idea. And a lot of people, there's a couple of different ways of thinking about that. One of them, of course, is that, life is precious, and all life is precious. And so, the idea of causing suffering. Buddhism is about suffering and the causes of suffering, and the cure for suffering is the thrust of it. And so to cause suffering, in other creatures it is not a great thing, not only because of the suffering, but also because it steals your happiness. When you are leading a life where you are compassionate about the suffering of all creatures, you grow to feel more connected to them. And when you feel more connected, you feel more of an internal locus of control. And you feel like you're part of something that's much greater than yourself. And so your idea of who you are and your position in the universe is one that is happier and more joyful. So much of it has to do with the idea of being happy, part of it. But I'll tell you a little funny Buddhist story. So the old monk and the young monk are invited out to the host's dinner party. And they arrive there and they sit down to the table, and sure enough, there is a slab of beef that's being presented. And the young monk is all, nervous about this and doesn't know what to do because he's taken a vow, not to eat beef, not to eat meat. So he asks the old monk to step aside for a second. He goes, Master, what are we going to do? I mean, they're serving beef at this meal. And the master, with his wisdom, looks down to him and says, well, the cow is already dead and the host is not. So there has to be some flexibility in all of it. Yeah. Within reason, everything is within reason. But happiness is so important, and it makes me think of a reporter reports of an interview with the Dalai Lama, and the question he asked was, Your Holiness, you have lost so much. The Chinese have invaded your land. You've had to go into exile. Your temples have been replaced by malls. Your sacred books have been burned. Your culture is being deconstructed. How is it that you remain so happy all the time? And his response was, yes, they have taken so much. I should let them take my happiness as well.
I like that.
There's a whole conversation, around, is the purpose of life to be happy?
Good question.
I think that's, I think the universal, if you ask anybody, you're talking about what we want to want. And I think we want to be happy. And I think that's universal everywhere. If you ask me, do you want to be happy? Everybody's going, yeah, I want to be happy. Unfortunately, people have different ideas about what makes them happy. And a lot of people substitute the idea of not joy, but some temporary giddiness with happiness. But happiness really comes with purpose and meaning and substance and having an internal locus of control.
What are your thoughts on something? Mm-hmm. Sorry, what are your thoughts on something like almost like voluntary, meaningful, strong word, suffering? Because I can remember when I used to row rowing team back in college, And every day you wake up at 4:45 in the morning to go drive to the water by 5:30, to get on the water by 6, to blast your lungs out while feeling like dying. And then like we didn't have a dock, so we had to walk into the water, and it was like middle of like, we're located in New York. So like in March, April, it was freezing water every day. And what was so funny about it was that it started to really create such an appreciation for little things. Whereas previously, you go and take a shower or whatever, you eat some food, whatever. If you wake up at 4:30 in the morning and sweat your butt off while freezing your butt off, while blasting your lungs out, and then you go take a shower, holy crap. Every day is the best shower you've ever had in your entire life. Everything you eat is the best food you've ever eaten every single day. And I think there's this problem, I think, where it's almost like, I have a friend of mine who made a very funny story. Sometimes we meet up for like contrast bathing, where it's like go to like this almost like a spa, where it's like jump into the cold water, then the hot tub, then the cold water, then the hot tub, back and forth. And he had a story about how when he was in high school, and he's like in his late 20s now, he was on I think it was the track and field. He was on the running team, something like that. And his team was blamed for leaving out some equipment that they didn't actually leave out. So they were forced to like run like 10 miles. And it happened to be like a really rainy and cold day. And it was just, he said like, it was the most miserable, worst thing ever. And I got home and took a shower, and that was the greatest shower I've ever taken in my entire life. And I've been trying for 10 years to try to replicate it. And I haven't been able to. And it's almost, when we say like happiness, I think happiness kind of becomes this question of like doing something that is meaningful but may not be easy, so that you can enjoy the simplicity of life thereafter.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes. Because life isn't always easy.
Yeah, and it's almost like you need those down cycles to really appreciate the up cycles, and also just appreciating the simplicity of day-to-day life and things like that. So I'm curious, like a last question here. With the general loss of religion and spirituality on like a more grander basis, how do you think the individual and the group and the society starts to step back towards those things? Because I think it's going to be a bit of I think people are going to end up cycling back to them regardless with time, inevitably, because people are going to just say like, it's not working. Our lack of spirituality, our lack of religious values and community is not working. What do? Oh, we have to go back and create a community and spirituality again. And then like what that process may look like, and how people are going to end up. How can the individual make a difference to start stepping in, to start making a difference in their life, maybe the lives of people around them?
So there's danger in that. This weekend, last week, I went to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. I live in North Carolina. It's about a 5-hour drive. And while we were there, I was with some good friends, and we went to Dollywood. Dollywood, Dolly Parton's amusement park. And at Dollywood, we experienced, it was very, very white. As a matter of fact, the only people of color that were there were the servants and the janitors and the like. It was very white, and it was very Christian. And I noticed that while I was there, I contrasted it with another situation. I have a friend who recently, unexpectedly, was fine 1 week, and then a couple of weeks later was in hospice for 2 weeks and died. And we had a little vigil for this person at the courthouse. And one of my friends, who's deeply Christian, got up and said, "I apologize. I don't mean to proselytize, and I don't mean to impose my faith on anyone." And she went on apologizing for a little while, and then said, "But Valerie was a person of great faith, and I know, about heaven and how she was saved." And this was her talk. Now, I contrast that with being in Dollywood, where as if this happened in Dollywood, she would not have had to go through all of those apologies because she would be with her people. And it was a homogeneous group, and everyone had the same values, and everyone was walking with my Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I looked at my wife and I said, "Do you think these are my people?" She goes, "Well, not really, Bob, But I did notice the happiness and the comfort level that folks had with being among people that shared the same value system. The only problem, of course, is that when that gets corrupted, then these people want the world to be like that, and they want everyone else to be like they are so that they can be comfortable and happy among their own people and not have to apologize for their faith. So we see the rise of things like Christian nationalism and some other things where people want this to be a Christian nation because they want that comfort and happiness. So if it is exclusive, and there's that kind of thinking, I think it's dangerous. However, if that idea of being in an interfaith community where people love and respect each other's belief systems for the shared values, that is our path forward.
Yeah.
And I'm really fortunate that Elon University has a multicultural spiritual center. And whenever I'm feeling a little bit, nonplussed or the like, I just go over there and sit in the sacred space for a little while. And it makes a huge difference. And they have a rabbi, and they have an imam, and they have a Protestant, and they have a priest, all on call. Those are all faculty. And they practice a great deal of interfaith dialogue. And it's a wonderful place, and it's very gratifying. Whether those people that are exclusive can eventually grow into that kind of respect is a big question. But I think that interfaith dialogue is the path forward to a world that works.
I have a friend of mine, one of my patients, who I believe he's Protestant, but he mentioned, I think Thanksgiving every year, there's a particular, I think it might be at his church, where they do an interfaith like feast.
Mm-hmm.
They invite like everybody who wants from every different faith to come around to basically just sit down and have bread and just talk and just hang out and be friends. And I think there's a big thing. And I guess one last question is like, how does one go about trying to guard the gates from like nationalism is a word, but I would say an extra word past that is like tyranny. Mm-hmm. Like tyrannical figures, because nationalism, I don't think that most of the people who are like mostly nationalists and extremely patriotic will say that are almost like toxically patriotic or toxically nationalist, that they themselves truly believe what they're saying, but someone else is telling them. And more often than not, when you get like a mob or a hate group or things like that, it's a very small amount of people calling the most of the big shots. And how you go about being on guard for that personality, being on guard for the pharaoh, making sure he doesn't step back in, and so kind of, or the czar, or like the next Hitler or Mussolini, mm-hmm. or whatever it may be, to ensure that they don't end up corrupting the group.
Mm-hmm. I once asked that question, and I was given a wonderful answer. So I heard that there was going to be a great Chinese Buddhist teacher that was going to be visiting the area. So I went to listen to his class. And we were sitting in a classroom, and there was about maybe 20, 30 of us there. And he was talking about typical Buddhist themes of compassion and empathy and love and loving kindness and the like. And eventually I raised my hand and I said, "Teacher, what you're talking about has been around for 4,000 or more years, where those that are proffering these ideas have been followed by a small band of followers while the rest of the world is running around with swords and torches. Why do I think it's going to be any different today?" And he looked and he smiled and he goes, "Irrelevant question." And everybody cracked up laughing. But when it quieted down, I asked him, "Why is it an irrelevant question?" And he says, "Well, no matter what I say in answer to your question, are you going to change the way that you get up in the morning and what you do with your life?" And I said, "No, I will still go out and do what I think is right." So it's an irrelevant question. And then finally he said, no, here's the answer. The answer is you go do what's right, because you never know when the tipping point comes. You never know when the tipping point comes. And from that day on, my answer to your question is you just get up and have the conversation that might be a little difficult with the person that doesn't care. And you maintain your calm and you maintain your loving kindness, and you go and you have dialogue and you keep doing what you're doing and be the change you want to see in the world, as Mahatma Gandhi said. And you just keep up and you keep doing it because you never know when the tipping point comes.
Yeah, I think this ties into the point earlier about the couples that you work with who are putting on a facade. Mm-hmm. They're almost like they're too afraid of being themselves. And I think that's pretty much the answer to all this, is like radical truth and honesty and authenticity will very quickly flesh out who is there with malicious intent. Because if they're not being themselves, they're hiding something, which means to keep them at bay or keep them at a distance.
Yeah. One of the lines in my book is, the Lord was authentic, and by his authenticity called to note those that were not.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing, even though with the interruptions and the lightning storm I had to just deal with. You said you have some books on the way. What's going on with that?
I do. I have this book. I Am the Way. I Am the Way. May I tell you the story of the book? Do we still have time?
Yeah.
So when I think I mentioned it, when I met my wife, our cosmologies were so different that I started taking my Taoist learnings and reimagining them into Christian devotionals. And so this is actually a Christian-oriented devotional based on Taoism.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be happy to read you one if you'd like me to.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, pick a number between 1 and 81. We'll see what comes up.
42.
42. Okay. Okay, so the way that the book is oriented, every chapter has a title that I gave it and a quote from somebody famous, and then what I wrote. Okay. So this one is called In the Beginning There Was Only God. So this, you can see the Taoism in here, because when I talk about man and woman, I'm talking about yin and yang from the Tao. Yeah. But in Christian terms, we're talking man and woman. So in the beginning, there was only God. In Taoism, we say in the beginning, there was only the Tao. In the beginning, there was only God. God created man, and from man made woman. And woman gives birth to man. Thus, man resides in woman, and woman resides in man. God created the energy we call male. God created the energy we call female. He imbued man with the masculine energy and the feminine energy so that man could understand woman. He imbued women with the feminine energy and the masculine energy so that women could understand man. It was the combination of these energies that populated the world and filled it with the 10,000 things. The masculine energy accomplishes, the feminine energy nurtures. Too much masculine learns to war. Too much feminine leads to la kumbaya. Balancing these energies leads to the great harmony. When harmony is lost, the people become lonely as orphans and widows and believe themselves to be unworthy. Those who lead with harmony and balance understand their importance. We hear them say, "It happened through me, not by me." They are quick to give others credit. Put all this aside. The most essential teaching is this: the Lord did not live a violent life, so do not do that and enjoy a natural death.
I like that. There's a movie from years ago, I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s, called Dogma. And it was a bit of a comedy movie that had a tie into religion. And at some point, the main character is talking to like it was the 13th prophet of Jesus. There's a joke. It was like the one that forgot about. Everyone forgot about. And she's talking to him, and she asks him, like, so what does God want? Because she's on this journey to accomplish something to save the world. And like, what does God want? What's the correct religion? What's the right one? And the guy says, like, God doesn't care what faith you have in as long as you have faith in something. Doesn't matter what religion it is, doesn't matter what spirituality is, as long as you have faith in something that's going to put you on a good path, and that whatever works for you is what works for you. I think you're a perfect example of that, and that you came from Taoism to Buddhism to Christianity, and there's all these interlinkings and intertwinings of the three, and even other ones beyond that we haven't talked about, and how impactful it can be. And even in your book, that it basically points to the fact that like it's giving the same message from different perspectives, but it's still the exact same value in each message.
Yes. So, here's my answer to Christian exclusivity, that if you don't find Jesus, then you go to hell. So in Trinitarian thinking, God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus are three manifestations of the same single unity, which means that God equals Jesus equals the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit is Jesus. So, if in John 3:16, Jesus says the only way to get to the Father is through me. But the question is, was he talking about me, the sack of skin? That was Jesus Christ? Or was he talking about me, the love and the spirit that is within me? Did he see himself as a physical being or a spiritual being? And if he was referring to me, then he's referring to the Holy Spirit. And there's no reason to believe that the Holy Spirit, if this is your belief system, did not imbue the entire world and touch the hearts of everyone. So if you are a person that accepts kindness and goodness and mercy and these as values, then the Holy Spirit has touched you. And the Holy Spirit is Jesus Christ according to Trinitarian beliefs. And so you have been saved.
Yeah.
Just
like that.
Kind of my answer to, that whole safety. But the funny part about it is my wife went off to church once before I went to this church that we're going now, this progressive church. She's going off to church, and I was just sitting home ready to watch the news programs. And she had these sad beagle dog eyes. And I said, honey, what's wrong? And she goes, I just love you so much, and I just hate it that you're not going to go to heaven with me. And I said to her, oh, yeah, well, I hate it that you're not going to be reincarnated with me. And she slapped me, she goes, oh, stop that. But eventually, I was impressed with the fact that the UCC brought a lawsuit against the state of North Carolina when gay marriage was illegal here, saying that it interfered with their religious rights to be able to marry people. And so I said, well, that's the kind of inclusivity that I think I've been looking for. So I went to the UCC church and had a conversation with them, and immediately fell in with a committee that was seeking to become open and affirming and gay friendly and all of those things. And I said to her, hey, hon, you ought to come over and check out this church. I like it. She goes, you like it? And I go, I do like it. And she comes over and she didn't want to go. And I said, but they have solar panels. And she goes, they have solar panels? Because she's a big environmentalist. They have recycling bins. Oh, they have a green committee. She goes, whoa, okay, I'll go. So she goes and she's sitting in the pew with me. And they read the first scripture. And she goes, they're teaching from the Bible. Because I had taken her to all kinds of places prior to this. They're teaching from the Bible. I go, well, yeah, it's a Christian church. She says, but you like it. I go, I do like it. These are good people. So I wound up getting baptized. Now she's happy. I'm going to go to heaven with her. Been saved.
And hopefully she'll be reincarnated in case that doesn't work out too.
Right. Okay. All right.
Mr. Martin, thank you so much for your time today. Really
thank you so much. Appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found us informative, thought-provoking, or learned something new, please leave a review or a comment and tell a friend about the podcast. Feedback means the world to me, as I want to make this the best possible podcast that it can be, and to help others identify the causes of and solutions to problems in their own lives and villages. Until next time, let's keep working on rebuilding the village.